Hi there, and welcome to the Rover Media Network's podcast, The Midnight Choir. Today we are missing one half of the Midnight Choir, and so I have replaced him with another reporter who you may or may not know, Rachel Gilmore. How are you?
I am fantastic. How are you, Isaac?
I'm good. It's been a wild day. I've been all over the city several times, but it's been a good day anyways. Listen, we are completely reader supported. If you want to support us, go to therover.ca/support us. Support-us, or therover.ca/support-us. I mess it up every time, and this time Chris is not here to correct me. Today we're going to be talking about some wild stuff going on in Canada and across the world, and it's just going to be us. So hopefully me and Rachel are not completely stupid, and we can hold down the fort. And I believe in us only because Rachel's here. Hopefully we can do it. We're going to talk about some fun stuff. Let's start off. Let's go right into it. Rachel, what's up in your life? What's the drama? What's the juice?
Well, there's always drama and juice, but today's drama and juice, which sounds disgusting.
I don't know why I went with juice instead of tea.
Well, I get it. Like
juice.
juicy is usually what people go for, but in this, now that we've made it weird, it feels weird to even say juicy.
Let's go.
We're getting juicy. We're gonna forge ahead.
Forge ahead in the juiciness.
So basically, the thing that I've been covering today is there's a Liberal MP, Anthony Housefather, who has been a very outspoken supporter of Israel. And he just went to Washington, D.C., where he spoke at a massive conference called the AGC Global Forum. And while he was there, he hung out with a celebrity who you guys may know, Michael Rappaport, who has been really outspoken, really, really pro-Israel. But in his pro-Israel stances has said some of the most anti-Arab, anti-Palestinian racist stuff that, is out there.
This is Michael Rapp. This is Michael Rapp, right?
Michael Rappaport.
Okay, so, that's
Rappaport.
His full name is Michael Rappaport.
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 Okay, that makes so much more sense. I was like, this is the Michael Rapp report, but his name is Michael Rappaport.
No.
All clear.
So anyways, he's been in Atypical, if you watch that show. He was in Fallout briefly. But he's been saying some really messed up stuff. And he came under fire a while ago because he compared a black woman to an ape.
Jesus Christ.
Post. Yeah, and he's also, days after the atrocities in Rafah, he took to social media and said, what good or valuable thing have people from Rafah ever contributed? That's a paraphrase. So there's an exact quote out there, but that's more or less the gist of what he was saying. So anyways, all of this was he made that comment about Rafah, I think 10 days ago. So it's not like this is distant past. And Anthony Housefather went to this event where Michael Rappaport was there in his capacity as someone who has been outspoken in favor of Israel, and took a selfie with the guy and called him an incredible activist. So
an incredible activist. He wasn't even there hey, I like your acting.
Exactly.
No, you're an activist.
Exactly. So it's kind of hard to see how that could be misinterpreted, or why an elected politician would say something like that and not have a reason to say it. Would he say that with no idea who this dude is or the things that he said? That would be odd, right? So anyways, I posted about it, and Anthony Housefather slid into my DMs and wasn't super happy with my post. He started with, "Wow, what a post," which was a little catty, I have to say. And then he basically just told me,
what a professional man.
Yeah, it was actually pretty funny when I talked to the Prime Minister's office. I don't think they were thrilled about the DM slide, but anyway.
Did you send them screenshots when you talked to the Prime Minister's office?
I'm sure they saw what was said. I did not show them, but I'm sure that they saw.
Cool. Yeah.
But basically, actually, I don't know that for a fact, but if I were someone's boss and I heard about this, I'd be like, show me what you said. That's what I would do.
I would too. Yeah, I would too.
Yeah. So anyways, basically, he DM'd me and he was kind of defending Rappaport, basically saying this is a huge convention and he was there as a keynote speaker. So I trust their vetting processes. So if you're attacking me for supporting this guy, you're attacking all of the, Jewish people who support this guy, which was quite a generalization, especially given that there was members of the Jewish community speaking out about how racist this guy has been. Like, I actually quoted one of these voices in my coverage of this, which I just posted on all my social medias. But someone from Independent Jewish Voices of Canada was saying that this guy's an anti-Palestinian racist, and
right.
a Liberal MP is posting a photo with him. So that's kind of the tea. He basically ended up deleting the post and telling me that he doesn't want it to be misinterpreted. He being Anthony Housefather. Sorry, there's so many names. This is like I'm gossiping like Real Housewives or something. But yeah, he deleted the post, said that he didn't want people to misinterpret him as supporting everything Rappaport says,
right.
Specifically highlighting my comments, which again, bit odd because he DM'd me in response to a post that I made.
Right.
That referenced those exact comments. So
right.
That's the gist. That's my drama. That's what's going on. So.
Right. It's really interesting to me. Like, I love talking to you because it's always these people hand you the ammunition. They're like, here's me being rude to you. And all you really got to do is like post a screenshot and people will be like, wow, this is for realsies, like. I don't understand the boldness of the individuals he'd slide into your DMs. Like, if he fully believed in what he said, why would he go talk to you like that? Like, wouldn't he just like be like, well, I believe in what I said, or I believe in my post or whatever. Like, it's very insecure to need to talk to you and be like, hey, that sucks. You're not supporting Jews. It's like, this is a reporter. You're a Liberal MP.
Yeah.
Why are you just going after her like this?
He even told me that I made him sad because he respected me. Like, I was like, if you didn't want to make me sad, why did you post this picture? Why are you supporting this guy? I am sad when people support people who are racist or defend people who are racist. That does make me sad. So, just a PSA to any MPs out there that don't want to make Rachel Gilmore sad. Don't take pics with racists.
Yeah. I mean, well, yeah. It's crazy the justifications that people are using for things in Rafah and things in Israel.
Yeah.
Where they go, well, the biggest one that I hear pushback, and I'm sure you've heard this one, Rachel, is, well, Palestinian government wouldn't support the LGBTQ, of which you are a part of. Oh, the Palestinian government is literally against the leftist view that you have. And I'm like, right. And that supports genocide? Like, is that what you're arguing to me right now? This is whataboutism. And like,
yeah, it is.
What you don't understand is that, yes, I probably would not agree with most of their government's decisions. And yet I believe that these people have the dignity to freedom and life.
Exactly.
Like,
there's a lot of people who have probably called me a cunt in my DMs who I would probably definitely defend against, atrocities.
Absolutely.
I will still defend you. Please don't call me that, but I will still defend you.
Yeah. You shouldn't call people the C word.
Are you gonna have to bleep that one? That was a big word.
Not. I don't have to bleep it.
That was like a $10 word.
If your kids are listening to this with you, it's up to you to parent them, not us. So if they haven't heard the word cunt, time to talk about it.
I think what Isaac's trying to say is fuck them kids, which
fuck
is
them kids. We don't like kids on this podcast. That's the official stance of the rubber. That's exactly right. Chris is going to get emails now where they're like, your producer hates children.
This is what happens when he takes a day off,
He shouldn't take a day off.
No, never.
Okay, what else have you been working on lately? Because, I see your posts all the time, but I don't know if everyone does. You should follow Rachel on Instagram, and you should follow her on Twitter, and you should follow her on YouTube, and...
Honestly, I just post on all the social medias. I have a link tree in my bio, so if you find one of me, you can find all the rest of me.
So what else have you been working on, like, beyond that? Because are you still... have you left the organization you worked for before yet?
No. I'm still with them.
Okay, are
It's
you
actually like very complimentary because
cool?
by the day I am fighting, to dismantle the disinformation economy
Right,
and to make sure that, advertisers aren't funding hate,
right,
and, other bad stuff. And actually, we've been posting more TikToks lately, which is super cool because I'm
right.
able
Which
to
you've
kind
been
of
doing the
use.
TikToks for that, haven't you?
Yeah, I've been doing it for them and for myself. So it's really fun to kind of be able to take those skills and bring them into this organization because the stuff that we're dealing with is so techy and complex that it's really fun to find a way to break it down into a short video that the general public will understand. And it feels like it can be super impactful because a lot of people
I
otherwise
feel like
wouldn't
that.
hear about this
Yeah,
stuff, right? So yeah, I'm still doing that work, still super happy. They're like the best people to work for. They're super cool. And they're
great.
really badass.
And you
And
work
then I'm doing a lot of
remotely,
personal
right?
reporting. Yeah, I work remotely, so I can
Great. So
work
you're going to continue working
anywhere.
remotely after you move?
Yeah. I'm going
Okay.
to be just holed up all the time.
Well, that's great. I mean, that makes total sense. It gives you the
Yeah.
freedom to move and do as you will. Okay, this is more of a philosophical question, but it
Yes.
pertains to the news, so I feel that I'm allowed to
Oh
ask it
God,
on
I
this
love
podcast.
these discussions, honestly.
So I'm going to start with a statement and then go into my question because
Okay.
you're an expert in a very specific field that I feel like a lot of people don't fully realize is like something that we need. We're desperate for more people like you. But
Oh.
so basically, the internet is and like interconnectivity and like technology is, in my opinion, the next stage of evolution in a very, very obvious sense for humanity, right? Constant connection is basically like creating a hive mind out of what used to be a completely individual mind, right? And across the globe, and it's completely changed society. It's completely changed things to have more of a monoculture. And I have personally found it to be mostly for the negative. And I was wondering how you perceive that because is it the reason for this rise in the alt-right? Is it the reason for like such division, or is this just the cycle of humanity? Because 100 years ago, World War II, this was also a thing. So
I think it's definitely a contributing factor. Like the
mhm.
ability to organize. In the past, actually no, that's way too big of a generalization. I was gonna say, the rising tides of like genocidal maniacs have eventually been battened down or eventually shut down, but not in every context, unfortunately. They really
Yeah,
did
I
some
mean,
damage before it got to
yeah,
that point.
yeah.
So
We talk about fascism being quenched after World War II, but it's like fascism continued reigning in Spain and
yeah,
Portugal until the 70s.
exactly.
Like,
Yeah, exactly. So it's I was about to make some sweeping generalizations and I
right.
started working through it in my brain and then did that out loud, which is always a smart thing to do when you're being recorded. But
Absolutely. Yes.
but no, I do think that it's a really brutal dichotomy where, we've got on the one hand this ability to connect in ways that is super beneficial. Like the smartest people from all around the world can exchange information and help one another and build on one another's, research. Activists can organize, when when they're not being throttled or shut down
Yeah.
by
Yeah.
tech,
Yeah.
big tech. But
Yeah.
there's all kinds of really beautiful things that come out of this interconnectivity. But then on the flip side, as you mentioned, there's a huge disinformation problem. And I absolutely think it's made worse by, it doesn't have to be made worse by technology, but the people who are running these technology companies who
Yeah.
are responsible for all of the governance decisions and the decisions with respect to what they allow on their platforms, what kinds of organizing conversations and everything
Yeah.
are allowed to take place on their platforms, they have the kind of ideology that is so laissez-faire, that is so like, just leaving people to their own devices and like
Right.
in a bit of an inconsistent way, depending on the platform, on most platforms. But,
Yeah. It's
and
like
that makes it a big problem.
they pose themselves as relatively left until they don't,
Yeah.
and then you're like, oh, and then X slash Twitter like has really just been like, no, we're for the alt-right.
Yeah. Basically.
So it's like it's very confusing having these giant tech corporations, which are obviously extremely conservative in practice,
Yeah.
pretend to be left until push comes to shove.
Yeah, and it's interesting because you will see them downrank content that is like they will take the steps of downranking content when it's overly political, so they say, but
Right.
they, but then they'll still, you can make arguments about the harm of all kinds of content, like the proliferation of body image
Yeah.
issues in young women that can often be attributed to pop culture and the kinds of images that they're seeing. So like, you can take every, bit of content that's on the internet and make an argument for it to be downranked, which is why it ends up being this super subjective thing. And I don't know, I think it's a huge problem. Like, and the things that these people running these platforms do in order to try to make these platforms so-called safer aren't really getting to the heart of the issue. A lot of these
Yeah.
people are, a really interesting aspect of the problem is that a lot of the people who have been shut out by those lackluster efforts by big tech, who have been shunted to the side or like banned or can't really organize in those spaces to the same degree anymore, although Elon Musk is shifting that back. They are also actively building their own sort of free speech ecosystem, which is,
Right.
free speech in this context tends to be pushed to its outer limits by these people. And so, there's all kinds of platforms cropping up where people can gather in that way and,
Right.
organize really, really messed up stuff. Like I'm actively monitoring groups where people are organizing money making tours and they're espousing, hateful values in
Right.
those conversations. And it's just, yeah, it's people have figured out how to use these tools, whether it be internet, whether it be like the internet broadly, whether it be specific social media platforms, whether it be, they're able to use these to their advantage to organize in a way that originally they weren't capable of. And it's super dangerous. And I feel like a lot of people on this sort of far right end of the spectrum have figured that out. And people who push back on those individuals have not figured out what to do about that, if that makes sense. I feel like that was a really rambly answer, but
It's okay. I asked you a philosophy question. I didn't ask you. The other thing, like, I was wondering your thoughts on, as somebody who fights disinformation on the internet, where do you land on like taking in and ingesting news from either end of the spectrum? Because I'm like, for example, I use ground news a lot, which is really useful for finding just insane amounts of sources and news and like finding stuff on the right, finding stuff on the left. But like some people would call that both sidesism. And but I'm pretty far left. I think that's clear. But like, where do you stand on that? Like, should we as leftist people / leftist media people, should we be talking about that? Should we be acknowledging those points, or should we only be making our points? How do we deal with that as news people?
yeah, first of all, I will say I don't formally publicly ascribe any particular ideology to my journalism.
Yeah,
But
neither do I, honestly. But
yeah, I
yeah,
just, yeah, but I do also agree that objectivity is a goal that doesn't really exist.
you
So
can only
that's a
you can
whole
only do
other
your
can of worms.
best,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Yeah,
Like my only allegiance is to the truth,
right,
and to trying to actually help people who are like
right.
marginalized.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Anyways, but yeah, like I think that uh, the way that I consume information online is honestly just with a really critical eye, no matter where I'm getting it from. We've seen that even, we've seen the failings of even the institutions that you can cite in a, scholarly paper, in the sense that,
Right,
like, New York Times and things like that, that my
right,
high school teachers would have let me cite for sure. They have failed in their, for example, coverage of trans issues. They've come under fire for platforming anti-trans voices to a disproportionate extent. And so, it's not just about the information that you get in a single story, but you have to also think about the, outlook that is being provided to you by the entirety of an outlet's news coverage. If they're
right.
only showing these anti-trans fear-mongery voices, as an example, you're
Hmm.
probably going to internalize some of that ideology because of the disproportionate energy that's put in those kinds of stories and like the number of those that you see, right?
Right.
So I just try to basically consume everything with a critical eye, although I don't have a lot of time for, I've noticed that a lot of like hard right media actually publishes falsehoods in the things that they post,
It's
or
weird
leaves out
because
really
their
essential
factuality
info.
is much lower, objectively
Yeah.
speaking.
Yeah. And so like I'm
Yeah.
comfortable reading a self-described progressive media outlet that I know adheres to journalistic standards. Like
Mm-hmm.
I'd be far more comfortable reading Press Progress, which is sort of a lefty news outlet that still does really solid, evidenced,
That's it.
factual
Yeah.
journalism. Um, Way more confident in that than anything I'd read on Rebel News or
That's
anywhere
it.
like that.
Like,
Like, I just don't consider that really journalism. I consider that to be a completely different thing.
right. It's weird looking at like when you look at factuality reports and like just companies that do like, well, here's where the facts are. Like, let's disprove things. Let's talk about what's right, what's wrong. And you're like, oh, like it actually is more factually inclined on the left for some reason. For some reason, the left has decided to be like, well, let's try our best. And it's a little bit dishonest on the right in like a sense where you're like, oh, like this is not always good faith journalism or good faith criticism that they're giving us, which is sad,
Exactly.
you know?
Yeah, I mean,
So
I think that where you get right wing factual journalism is a place like, depending on the section, the National Post, or the
yeah,
Wall Street Journal. Like,
yeah, mostly pretty
that's
good.
more what I would consider to be like a right
Wall Street
wing.
Journal, definitely right wing, pretty factual
Yeah, exactly. Like they're
until you
still
read their
sticking.
editorials.
Well, that's why I was saying depending on the section, because like, ooh, to make the points they try to make in some editorials, they have to leave out a lot of relevant context.
God, the Wall Street Journal has made me a lot more famous than I'm supposed to be.
Really?
Because their articles were sometimes so heinous that I would just, me and Jay, my former partner, my music partner before, we would take a screenshot of it and then we would make jingles based on what the Wall Street Journal's titles were. And like there was one that was basically like, millennials should eat less if they're so poor.
Oh my God.
It was like really. And so we had millions of views on that.
Yeah.
Millions of views.
That's such an unhinged article.
Yeah,
Oh my
it was an
God.
amazing moment in my life where I was like, wow, and it was editorial because of course it was.
Of course. Yeah.
Somebody on Wall Street was going, you know what? It's your fault for eating food.
Have you tried not eating? Have you tried
Yes.
starving?
I think most millennials do eat less, actually. Like I eat 2 meals a day. Don't know about you.
Yeah, actually, I do intermittent fasting kind of like
It's way cheaper.
it is. Yeah. And I just don't have I'm busy in the morning, man,
totally.
like
Yep.
Gotta pay for
I
my
throw back
avocado
my
toast.
11 a.m. meal and then I eat at 5. And then
Yeah.
that's it. I'm done. Not
I
'cause
do
of a
like to
diet.
snack like all evening. So I have to be careful what I have in the house because that
Right.
like evening meal can turn into like an evening graze,
Totally. Well, on the point of factual reporting, let's talk about some reporting that's been going on in the news. Transition. Wow, that was really good. Canadian spies are taking over the parliament. Did you know that?
I knew that because I was a spy when I was there.
You were a spy.
I'm just kidding. That's disinformation.
That was
Maliciously
disinformation.
spread falsehood.
So the Politico just released an article on this. That's where I'm getting my news. I'll put it in the show link. But basically, there was a committee that was put in place in 2023, I believe, November or December 2023, something like that. And to check foreign interference in elections in Canada. And apparently, there have been a few politicians who are being accused of treason after this report. Now, can you guess who's accusing the treason? And can you guess who's saying that it's probably not treason? I bet you can. It's
Are you
Pierre
asking
Poilievre.
me or the public?
It's Pierre Poilievre. It doesn't matter. Pierre
Yeah, it's
Poilievre
always
is
Pierre
calling
Poilievre.
treason because it's usually Pierre. And he's just saying that basically there needs to be a release of this information because in the report that was given, there's a lot of redacted information because this is talking about people's personal lives and all this stuff. And so he is calling for there to be a release of this information for the public to consume. Now, I just want to say that if there is certain treason, I promise it will not be on one side or the other. But also, it doesn't seem like there is treason. Elizabeth May came out saying, no, there is no treason, even if there is election interference. Were you going to say something, Rachel?
Oh, no, I'm just listening.
Yeah. Do you have any reports or anything that you've been following up on with this, Rachel? You said you hadn't, right?
So I haven't been following it super closely because honestly, the like Ottawa press is obsessed with foreign interference. Like
Oh,
they
really?
love covering it. Like it's
Okay.
all, I swear, it's like huge. It's
Okay.
massive. So like I don't really cover it because there's so many people who cover it and cover
It's
it
already
really
happening.
well,
Yeah, yeah.
you
Yeah,
know?
yeah.
So I kind of just leave them to it. But I will say that one thing that I saw that I'm actually just scrolling to try to find was from Stephanie Carvin, who is a national security expert. She formerly, I think, worked for CSIS. And
Okay.
basically, she was saying that we have to be kind of careful calling for names to be released because
Yes.
intelligence isn't always fact, you know, like you can't they compile these reports based on, you know, there's suppositions, there's assumptions, there's, you know, it's not like hardcore proof. And if you're going to accuse someone of effectively like a crime, it should be pretty factual. And so if they, yeah, she said here, intel isn't intelligence. It will absolutely ruin lives. So there could be people named in this report based on suspicions who actually haven't done anything. But if those names are made public, and people aren't good at seeing names listed in controversial
No,
instances
no,
and
no, no,
being
no, no.
normal about
It
it.
gets dangerous.
You
Immediately
know?
dangerous for that person.
Yeah. And so
Um,
I just think that that is a really important point to consider that I didn't initially consider. I was like, hell yeah, like we deserve the names. If there's people doing this, like they should make that public. Why not? And Stephanie Carvin explained exactly why not, because people could end up having their lives ruined incorrectly.
right. It's essentially doxing someone for something that is also, I don't think it should be public. Something this serious, like if this is like actually, you know, something this serious, like, okay, maybe it is true. It says in the report, some people knowingly or through willful blindness may have worked with foreign missions or their proxies or shared privileged information with foreign diplomatic officials. You're like, okay, that's serious. That's a serious allegation. And if it is in fact true, it should be treated seriously. But I'm not sure that that is something that the general public needs to know. Like this will be something that we're going to talk about in a moment. We can actually talk about it now, but not everything should be public knowledge because that can cause mass panic. That can cause
Yeah.
serious disruptions to like stability within like a society.
Yeah,
Um,
for sure.
like for example, something that we're about to talk about is that. Oh, I didn't write it here. I should have written it here. I thought I did write it here. Okay, well, I was just reading a report on Politico once again about how Canada is preparing a contingency in case the United States has a civil war. And I was curious to talk about that with you because I personally don't see that as something that'll happen.
Civil War
Civil war,
in the
yeah,
US.
in the U.S. in 2024.
Yeah, I feel like I do think there's going to be more violence for sure.
I
But
think violence, but I don't think a civil war. I don't think
yeah.
that's possible based on the astounding power of the army and the government and like the National Guard and like like to argue that would be to argue that like, oh, like the armaments of the individual citizen they have more power than the
Yeah.
National Guard.
Yeah, I think civil war implies like, you know, two sides or something, you know,
Right.
like two somewhat equal, at least in the sense that they can threaten
Right.
each
Exactly.
other's like
Exactly.
entire existence.
Hmm.
So I think you're right about that. It would be more like, you know, there are there are militias, there are people
Hmm.
organizing active clubs in especially like white nationalist
Right.
communities.
Yes.
Um, and, you know, that could result in, I would argue, like it could lead to acts of violence. It could be organized acts of violence. It could lead to like political violence, but I don't think that they are big enough to do anything that would literally
Yeah.
be a civil war. Like I don't think there
Yeah.
would be enough people to support that side. It's kind of like if you took all of the people who were on Capitol Hill on January 6th, right? And you disperse them all across the country to
Which
enact
is
their
the
goals,
reality.
like
Right.
I don't think they would be anywhere near the majority. I hope not.
Of course not. Right. And what that made me think about was like, and I thought it would be interesting to ask you about this because you've been a reporter in Ottawa for a while. So the amount of contingencies that the Canadian government has, like, to what extent does it go? Like, they're obviously ready for nuclear war in case that happens between Ukraine and Russia, right? Like, that, to what extent are they prepared for these kind of things? And like, how much do they not tell the public because it would just be disrupting, and or it just is not important right now?
Well, honestly, it's kind of inherently difficult to answer because of the fact that like that would be obviously, fairly secret information.
Right.
We do hear from time to time about preparations being done for various scenarios. Like there was a story covered, like I remember I covered this on my TikTok like a year ago of Melanie Joly saying that Canada is putting plans in place in case there's issues with the American democracy or something, or they're
yeah, I remember that too.
There was something along those lines. So like, it's not really a new conversation, and it's like, any responsible government would have at least conversations about things that are somewhat within the realm of possibility. Right. And, and that's why those things like the Civil War kind of vibe ends up being news, because like if the government takes it seriously enough to have any like semblance of a conversation about it,
right,
that is interesting. But that doesn't mean it's going to happen. Like we've got all kinds of plans in place. I think most of our preparedness plans have to do with, natural disasters and situations like that. I mean, do you know about the fault line out west? That's my Roman Empire, baby. Like that one.
Yeah.
I think about it so much, but that could be.
I mean, listen, half my city, because I'm from Vancouver, half of my city will just sink into the ground.
This is what I'm talking about. So, there's all kinds of things that government should be preparing for at all times. I think that also in many scenarios, what's actually scary is like, probably the things we aren't preparing for. I mean, you hear about Ford cutting down on some pandemic preparedness efforts, things like that. So I would argue that there's probably less preparation going on for things than there should be, but you only have so many resources, right? So
you only have so many resources, and you can only juggle so many major catastrophic potential, like, because none of these things are actively happening, otherwise it wouldn't be preparation, it would be reacting.
Exactly.
So like, how many things can you just be like, well, this also could happen, well, this also could happen, like we have a crisis already with like natural disasters, with the forest fires.
100%.
Like it's already a serious problem, and it's affecting the states, it's affecting the planet, like and we're not even ready for that, and that's going on. Yeah. So
and we have a in tandem with that, a crisis going on of misinformation. A bunch of people think that it's not global warming, it's arsonists.
It's the elites. It's the elites.
It's Klaus Schwab, running around with a lighter, right?
When I heard that, I was like, wait, you think it's people, like very wealthy people, the elites, just setting fire to the forests?
Isn't that what you would do if you were elite? Just light a few forest fires?
It's like when a few weeks back, me and Chris were talking about conspiracies, where like people are like, it's the rich who are making the woke thing happen. And you're like, when has leftism ever been any rich person's agenda? When? That's never been an agenda of someone who's wealthy.
I thought Galen Weston was like, I'm just fucking with you. Like,
I was like, oh my God.
Stupid joke.
There's like, anyways, we could go on for a while about rich people like pretending to be left. It's like a real thing.
Oh yeah.
But like, it's just not true. To get to be a billionaire, you cannot fundamentally be left.
Yeah. Like, no. It's unethical to be a billionaire.
It's unethical to be a billionaire. Like and to become one, you have to have stabbed some people, like figuratively or literally. I'm not even saying in the back, sometimes to their face,
Yeah.
Anyways, no bodies were found at the church where they suspected there were a bunch of bodies in regards to the residential schools. On the Pine Creek Residential School Church in Manitoba, there have been no bodies found. They detected 14 abnormal objects underneath the church, and they have found none. And I thought that was an important thing to talk about because immediately right-wing news outlets were like, well, this proves that this was not a genocide and that residential schools were not as bad as they are made out to be now. What is your response to that, Rachel?
Go fuck yourselves. Yeah, just because this one excavation didn't turn up,
Right.
Remains, absolutely does not discount the experience of so many people whose descendants, and not even descendants, they're survivors alive.
They're survivors.
Today.
There's people
the
quite alive.
last school closed in
96.
99, I think, or 96.
96.
Yeah. So it's ridiculous. It's racist. Yep. It's offensive. And I can't imagine looking someone in the eyes and who has had, the kinds of experiences that people had in those schools and telling them what happened to you didn't happen.
Yeah.
It's just horrific. And, people take one moment where, I don't even know, I haven't read this article yet, so I don't know exactly what methodology was used, but often there's oral knowledge passed down about where remains are in these communities, and communities know for a really long time where remains are located. Right. And so there's all kinds of places where they haven't done any real investigation or even ground penetrating radar, but people know in the community because of the history and, how, and their memories and their experiences. So I just think it's so ridiculous to discount all of that because of a single news article that proves your racist ass narrative, because you apparently just like to pretend that people would make up horrific trauma because for some reason it hurts your fifis. Right. That as a white person, that maybe we weren't and aren't always so great.
Yeah. Y'all, colonization was real. Yeah. And it was a sincerely bad thing. We currently live in what I would interpret as essentially an apartheid state. I think it's improving. Yeah. But when you sequester people onto small patches of land and you say, this is what you get, we get the rest. And then, for example, a great example of why I do think it's like we live in an active apartheid state in Canada would be because of things like the oil pipeline, where it had to go across Indigenous land, and yet when they said no, even though, because they own the land, not the government went, well, we're still going to do it. And that is the definition of government overreach. This is yours. We're trying to make amends. And then they're like, well, except when you're getting in the way of what we want to do, which is kind of like, well, that's a seriously problematic way to be. And colonization continues today. I think the way that we are dealing with it is super problematic. Land acknowledgements. What? What are you doing? That's fine, but there's no real action being taken.
It's I'm sure feels frustrating, and I can't imagine because I'm obviously I'm not an Indigenous person, so I can't say how they feel in those moments. But if you watch someone who is enacting policies or defending or supporting policies that harm your people while doing a land acknowledgement, that would probably ring pretty fucking hollow.
Oh man.
Yeah.
It's crazy to me that's it's the most appeasement thing I've ever seen. And whenever I've seen comedic stand-up, comedy stand-up people do acts on that, I'm like, yeah, this deserves to be mocked. Because
my problem is, though, that I feel like a lot of people who mock those things come from a place of just not wanting
malice.
Any of it,
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I know
totally
that's not
right.
where you're coming from with it,
right?
But
no.
Imagine you just come out as like super racist right now.
I'm like, I
Pisses
am
off
a
and you're like,
racist. I just like
wow.
start, yeah, that would be
So I
shocking.
think
The
my
one
time here, I
episode
think I
Chris
gotta
isn't
go.
on, and then I just release it. I'm like, here you go, world.
Oh
Like,
my God.
I like use AI and generate your voice as a racist, and I'm
Oh my
like, there you
God.
go.
They're already friggin' doing that, honestly. Did you see like I don't know,
To
I've
you?
seen yeah, these like Diagolon guys have been
What?
editing
The
they edit
Diagonal
my
Boys coming
TikToks.
back.
Always. They're so
Ah,
busy. They're so obsessed. But like I saw recently, like one of them made a video of a TikTok I made that made it sound like I was saying something white nationalist because they like just cropped it. So when I was quoting someone saying something problematic, they just left that in. And that was it. And yeah, anyone with like 3 brain cells obviously would know that's not
yeah, that's
real. And
it.
like, and for them, it's like a sick meme, but it kind of just makes you look like fans, you know?
It
Like,
sounds like they are your fan, though.
I wish they weren't, but if they really want to keep making my stuff go viral, I'm not going to
It's
stop them.
yeah, it's backfiring on them as they continue to push it for you.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you haven't heard all of this stuff, like if you guys are lacking context for who Rachel is and what Rachel does, go check out our last episode with Rachel, our last 2 episodes with Rachel. They were great, and Rachel is real interesting. So go check those out. Really
Thank
deep
you.
dive into Rachel's career and what she's been up to. Finally, the last thing that we'll talk about, it'll be a shorter episode, which I think is perfectly fine. It's still 40 minutes. Um,
I still managed
Quebec.
to ramble about some stuff, you know?
Hey,
So really go
listen.
on.
Yeah. We're keeping it prompt, y'all.
Yeah. Yeah.
Quebec is receiving $750 million from Ottawa to help with temporary immigrants who have come to the province, which has enraged other premiers and has lit some extremely racist comments from the premier of Quebec. He said, 100%, this is what he said, 100% of Quebec's rental problems are due to immigration. 100%.
Wow.
Monsieur Legault. What?
That's so wrong.
Isn't that absurd? Like,
Like-
this is the premier of Quebec saying 100%. I'm going to find the exact quote.
That's also like beyond being racist, it's embarrassing. Like that's how little you understand the machinations or machinations of your own province and like how it works. That you're that wrong. Like it's embarrassing.
Here is what he said. Legault says, yeah, he literally says exactly that. He says, Legault is disappointed that the federal government did not commit to quantifiable objectives to reduce temporary immigration. He's trying to bring down temporary asylum by 50% within a year. And he says, let me find the quote. 100% of the province's housing problems are due to non-permanent residents. Wow. You're like, that's as blatantly racist as you can possibly be.
Yeah, 100%.
There's no veiled thing in there.
No. Wow. How many months do you think, give or take, until he does like full blown replacement theory?
Is that not already that?
I mean,
I guess
it
not.
is in a way.
Yeah, I mean,
He's not explicitly saying that white people are being replaced, but he's not far off. He's he's like 3 rungs down from that.
it's really interesting. We've talked about this a fair bit, not when you've been on, Rachel, but how much of like the French like right-wing politics that Quebec loves to adopt. And it's like really dark because people from like Quebec historically very progressive in a fiscal way. Like the way I try to describe it to like anyone I'm talking about this, Quebec is very fiscally progressive and very culturally conservative. And it's a little confusing, except for Montreal, because well, it's a massive city. Like it's hard to make giant cities not left. But Quebec is this weird place where you're like, well, they have excellent like post-secondary free education. They have a pharmacare program already implemented into their healthcare. They have, we have some of the best standards of living on the planet Earth, and yet extremely conservative when it comes to cultural things. And you're like, wow, that's very surprising considering how progressive they are in other ways. But it's very European style politics. It is very European, because Europe is that. You go to Europe, listen, man. I don't, have you ever traveled in Europe, Rachel?
Yeah, a fair bit.
You go and you're like, oh, it's not true. There's not only white people, but you're like, there's mostly only white people there. And you're like, as a Canadian growing up in a major city and only having ever lived in major cities, I'm like, cool. Cities have an insane amount of multiculturalism. That's just how my brain works. You go to Europe and you're like, okay, multiculturalism, I guess, is the countries. Like, that's how they view it. Fair enough. I get it. But then you ask someone like, what do you think about, the Turkish guy over there? And they're like, I hate Turks. And you're like, what? Like, you just said that, like Europe, it's like, oh, we're progressive, we're open. And then in reality, Europeans, no offense, Europeans, this is a generalization. It is not true for probably like 45% of the population, but that 55% is the majority. So it's shocking the racism you'll hear and like just the crazy stuff. Like a friend of mine said that he went to the Kendrick Lamar concert in Paris and everyone in the crowd is shouting the N-word with Kendrick Lamar. And you're like, that's wrong. Like everyone knows that's wrong. I don't care who you are. And you're like, you can't sing that with Kendrick.
Yeah. Oh my God.
So European views are, and Quebec is like that too, where you're like, if you talk to someone from the region, you're like, oh, like, you really do think like this. Someone just got fired from my other workplace for calling in front of a black customer, called them babouin, which means monkeys, in front of them. And you're like, but that person was from the region, like the eastern townships. And it's not surprising to hear that.
Yeah.
And I don't think Quebecers are generally racist. I think Quebecers are very, very welcoming. But also there's like a very different perspective when it comes to Quebec, and a very different attitude and way of thinking.
Interesting.
But I don't think they're trying to be racist. I earnestly do not think that.
Yeah, and there are some people trying, for sure.
For sure, there's people trying.
Like in general, so there's definitely different degrees, but obviously the impact is the same. But it's so interesting to me when I see the emphasis put so hard on immigration. It's such hardcore scapegoating when it comes to our housing issues, because I did a piece like deep diving on housing and like the problems with our housing. The biggest issue is supply. It's that we don't have enough houses and we need to build more. And, that there's so many things that need to go into that. There's like bureaucratic red tape issues. There's issues with sourcing and, actually getting the materials. There's issues with training laborers. Like there's all kinds of people and like solutions that you can point to as being major issues with the housing crisis before you bother pointing out, like, obviously, like, having more people and having less houses is a problem. But there's also like, REITs, real estate investment trusts, buying up entire apartment buildings and jacking up the rent and making it impossible to afford to live. So, you look at some condos and you can see
in
that
Ontario,
sitting empty.
The Ford government has removed any rental control from buildings built after 2018. No rental control. Yeah. So you're living in a place and they can say to you, hey, the lease is over. I'm raising the price by $1,000 a month next month.
Yep. Yeah, it's screwed up. And so I think it is so ridiculous and such a tell when people point to one tiny, like obviously having more population could create an issue, like could contribute to an issue that is the product of so many other factors. It's like one factor among so many. So when you try to blame that one group, that one, racialized group generally, Like you're just telling on yourself. And it's so disgusting. Like I've seen a real emphasis on a real shift. There's different things that become in vogue in extremist communities and in like, you know, the neo-Nazi group chats and stuff for like what hate they're pushing. You know, like for a while they're going really hard on, you know, trans issues. Before that, it was the vaccine. They're still going hard on trans issues, but they're also going so hard right now against Indian immigrants from India.
Indian immigrants are the scapegoat.
Specifically.
They are
and
the scapegoat.
I'm watching white nationalists, you know, or well, I guess they don't technically describe themselves as white nationalists, so I will couch my words here. But I'm watching people who express ideology that is quite similar to that, you know, laughing at footage of people from India being graphically run over by trains. Footage that made me sick to my stomach. I watched someone live stream that footage laughing. And, you know, and when I pointed out that that was problematic, the leader of that group said that he hopes I get gang raped in the street by Indians and he wouldn't even stop them. He'd laugh. You know, it's just like, it's such a vitriolic, like it's coming from a place of such hate. And it's being exacerbated by bad faith reporters who are, you know, making the issue even worse. Like True North is going in to PEI and doing these reports, like putting the word illegals in all caps and like, you know, just speaking about immigration and covering, there's some student protests going on in PEI with people from India. And the guy who they have covering it was exposed 3 years ago as being the president of a club at a time when it was exposed as having white nationalist ties. Like it's just, and I reached out to True North about this, giving them a chance to be good faith and like, you know, oh, we didn't know, you know, I know for a fact that this got to them and they just accused me of doing bad faith journalism.
Right.
You know, so like they didn't do anything. This guy's still covering this stuff as far as I know. Like he's, and it's really gross. So it's just like, really this is something that's happening in our media. It's happening in extremist circles that then push it into this more mainstream brand of conservatism, this laundered kind of like, you know, this guy at True North is being shared on extremist Telegram chats while he's reporting for an organization that also gets one-on-ones with Pierre Poilievre. So like it kind of gives it this legitimacy when arguably his reporting could be colored by some concerning past associations. Right. So I don't know. And then he's like posing for selfies with guys in Diagolon hats and stuff. Like it's just, sorry, I'm like, it's a bit of a rambly thing, but the overarching point I'm trying to make is that this is how it happens. You know, you see these conversations in extremist circles and then they get kind of laundered into the mainstream through people who are willing to do bad faith journalism.
Yeah, I'm looking at, I pulled up while you were talking, Rachel, because I just thought you were making really good points. I was like, oh, I'd like to support this with like sort of like some research and stuff like that. If you look up the early signs of fascism, and now I just want to be clear, I do not think under any circumstances that the premier of Quebec is even remotely fascist. I think he's actually quite a large supporter of democracy. I think he would not, if he got voted out, he would not question it. And I, you know, as much as I disagree with a lot of his policies, I do think he's somebody who believes in democracy and believes in the stability of the country. But, so I'm not accusing him. And I also don't want to accuse, like, I think that Pierre Poilievre is also believes in democracy mostly. Except for a few things that I've noticed that I'm like, what?
Like, he definitely doesn't believe in media.
He doesn't, and that's the thing. But that is a sign. But. So like fascism is in the States, you can look at the signs of it and you're like, okay, like I can see clearly these things happening in the States. In Canada, it's kind of pick and choosy. So like there's some things that have entered the mainstream that are fascistic. They're fasci, right? But I don't think our governments are veering towards that at all. I think we have a very stable democracy, and there's, you know, some challenges with the media and stuff like that, and like how the right wing is approaching media. But something that has been adopted is scapegoating, and that's one of the early signs of fascism. It's scapegoating. Let me read it. It says identification of enemies / scapegoats as a unifying cause. You're like, yeah, that's exactly what that is, right?
Yeah.
and the other one is a disdain for human rights, and the other one will be a disdain for media. Like those. And now I would say the rest, if you look at the list of like signs of fascism, most of them essentially don't apply at all to Canada. But those three have crept their way into the conservative world of Canada. Disdain for media, disregard for certain human rights, and scapegoating. Those have become mainstream ideas in the conservative parties, whether it's the Ford Party, whether it's the CAC, whether it's the federal conservatives. Those three things are very prevalent, and it's a bad sign, y'all. You don't want to ally yourself with a group that is starting to do that. You want to push back against that. It's okay to be a conservative. That's fine if you have like, I don't know, more religious views, but like those are things you don't want to do.
Well, and I would even argue that like I wouldn't, like, you can point out, obviously, like, I'm not trying to like both sides this or anything.
Me neither.
Like, but like, you know, there is the reality that these values and these attitudes are showing up more so in people who will vote either conservative or PPC. But I would argue that those are not conservative values per se.
I don't think so either.
You know,
I don't think
they're
they're conservative values.
That's why you get these people who are traditionally conservative voters who are now feeling really alienated because they don't support this thing, all this stuff you just described, but they're seeing that going on. Yeah. And it actually puts them in a pretty difficult spot politically. Like they're kind of politically, you know.
What are you supposed to do? Like, what are you supposed to do when you don't have a party that kind of aligns with your values, right?
Yeah, and it's really, really difficult. And, but also one thing that I would say too, and maybe this is like me being a little too fear-mongery, but I lived in Tunisia for 2.5 months. It had been a democracy for about a decade, you know, after the Arab Spring and everything. And it was at a time when they had this referendum upcoming that was really, depending on who you spoke to about it, their democracy was arguably on the ballot in this referendum because it was going to open up their constitution and make some major changes. And so it was basically, do you trust the current president to make these changes? And there were things happening. Like I would read a news article on my phone and it would say that the president just fired several judges that he disagreed with politically and things like that, you know, and you would see these headlines, but then you'd still be able to go out for drinks with your friends. You'd still be able to like shop downtown in the Medina. You'd still be able to, I literally saw Jurassic Park in a movie theater. Like it was super chill and normal, you know, but what really stood out to me in that moment was that I was there and was living as a person with a great deal of privilege. Like my money went really far there. And like, I knew that I had a lot of privilege and like wealth in this setting. And that demonstrated to me how comfortable you can be if you're privileged while democracy is crumbling around you. And I think that like, it really hit me that democracy is something that is actually fairly delicate and needs to be constantly nurtured. And, you know, you need to be mindful about things that chip away at it and things that can hurt it. And if you are someone with privilege, you're going to feel that last. So listen to people around you who are less privileged and are feeling it before you.
You know, something that I've seen brought up recently, I think it was in the Walrus, the magazine. Great article, amazing article. I'll link it below about how the Canadian Constitution needs to be retooled. And, you know, like it would take referendums and we would need like a very stable climate to do it, of course. But it was a really good point where like our Constitution is almost 200 years old. The United States Constitution is much older, the oldest Constitution in the world, right? And it's one of those things where like actually like, yeah, like think about the social and like global context of having written a constitution in 1850 or not 18. Yeah, I was right about that. Yeah. So somewhere around there, right? You know, like 1870, I think is like ish. Anyways, like in what way is the world remotely similar to the 1800s?
Yeah.
You know, like we should rethink certain things. We should rethink language. We should rethink, you know, and I'm not saying we need to throw everything out. Like we shouldn't. We should keep human rights. We should fight for the good of all people. We should keep freedom of expression, all that stuff, right? But also like people think it would be undemocratic to change it, but I'm like, well, it would be democratic to change it for the times and like update it more severely. But like it is a political nightmare to try and change the Constitution. Like, you're committing political suicide to even suggest that. So that's why people don't. But it's just an interesting idea and thought that I think is relevant and in today's political discussion.
Yeah. It's an interesting idea, and I'm looking forward to reading that article because
I'll send you that article. It's really good. And it's a friend of Chris's. Chris's friend wrote it. So cool. I'm like a really, Chris was like, yeah, an amazing like thinker and reporter. And so
awesome. I'm really excited to read it.
Is there anything else you want to say before we go, Rachel?
I don't think so.
Where can they find you?
You can find me on social medias. I'm Rachel Gilmore. Different iterations of that. So if you just Google Rachel Gilmore, journalist, Canada, you'll probably find one of my socials. Then you can find all the others. They're all linked in my link tree.
Great. It'll be linked below as well.
Yeah.
So please check it out.
Aside from that, I would just say, there's a lot of really terrible shit happening in the world right now. And I hope people don't lose sight of their capacity to help each other and have empathy. And it's just like, I know that's so cheesy, but I have the UNRWA donation link in my link tree as well. So you can help people in Palestine who are, suffering from a man-made famine, so that there's actually stuff that can get there once they are able to get aid into Gaza. But yeah, there's a lot of dark shit out there. So
it's a lot of dark
thank you for hanging out with us.
And thank you so much, guys. Please check out The Rover. Sign up for our free newsletter. Sign up for our paid newsletter, therover.ca/support-us. You can go on, follow me or Chris on social media. Chris is much more interesting than me. I sometimes post stories about my cat. I'm really burnt out on social media, so I don't do much on there. Please go support the letter. Subscribe below. Like the videos. Subscribe if you want the audio podcast. We are trying to get to 1,000. We will sooner or later. We're getting more and more each week. It's a slow build up, but that 1,000 number is what we want to hit. Thank you so much for listening, guys. Sorry that Chris wasn't here this week, and I hope that I didn't say anything that made too many people too mad. Chris shouldn't have given me the driver's wheel. Thank you so much, Rachel. Goodbye.
Thank you for having me. Bye.